Chapter 10. The Third Period. The period between 1918 and the end of 1923 was a period of large mass movements and revolutions. Suffice it to recall the proletarian revolution in Hungary, the proletarian revolution in Bavaria, the seizure of factories by workers in Italy, the uprising in 1921 in Germany, the powerful revolutionary movement in Germany in the autumn of 1923. This period ended with the defeat of the German Revolution. The following period is that of relative and partial stabilization of capitalism. Capitalist production increases, but it cannot overcome the general crisis of capitalism. World economy is split into two sectors, the capitalist and the socialist one. Capitalism introduces higher technique, it resorts to mass production, but the new and mounting mass of goods needs a market while the markets are shrinking. The capitalists increase their exploitation of the workers in order to secure profits for capital, but this in turn diminishes the home market. In many countries, while there is so-called prosperity, the standards of living of the workers become lower, which means a decrease in their purchasing power. All this drives the imperialists to search frantically for new markets, for new investment spheres and sources of raw material. This is fraught with renewed clashes between the imperialist powers. Every government is feverishly arming. New wars are in the offing. At the same time, the exploitation of the masses, both workers and farmers, calls forth increased resistance. In the colonies, there is a sharpened anti-imperialist movement, often assuming the proportions of revolt. Such was the situation by 1928, and this was the reason why, when the 6th Congress of the Communist International convened in the summer of 1928, it declared that the end of capitalist stabilization was at hand, and that a new period had begun, the third post-war period. In that period, said the Comintern, the masses are becoming more radical. They're participating in struggles against capitalism in greater numbers. In consequence of the growing inner and outer contradictions of the capitalist countries, the revolutionary spirit of the workers, said the Comintern, will rise. In the not distant future, the Comintern foresaw a new round of wars and revolutions. The man most instrumental in bringing about this understanding of the world situation was Stalin. It is he who possessed the keen sense of reality and the clear understanding of the road to be followed. It is he who fought unremittingly against both fronts, the opportunists from the right, who, like the Lovestonites in the USA, saw no impending crisis, no radicalization of the workers in capitalist countries, and no possibility of rapid advance toward socialism in the USSR. And the opportunists from the ultra-left who advocated unsound, adventurous experiments out of sheer disbelief in the maturing revolutionary forces. Subsequent events proved the correctness of Stalin's analysis. The worldwide economic crisis struck full blast at the very vitals of the entire capitalist system hardly 1 year after the Congress. The revolutionary movement in India, Arabia, and a number of other colonies, the victories of the Chinese Soviets, the revolution in Cuba, the revolution in Spain, the revolutionary uprising in Austria, the growing revolutionary movement in France and the United States are a few of the many upheavals marking the third period. We must confess we never found in the Trotskyite writings anything resembling why they disagreed with the third period analysis. They just scoffed. They did not see any new period. To them, capitalism in 1928 and later was still stable. All these facts of revolutionary movements failed to impress them. Capitalism is still unshakable in their estimation. Chapter 11. The German Situation and the Question of Social-Fascism. The greatest factor in the stabilization of capitalism after the first round of wars and revolutions was social democracy. In such countries as Germany and Austria, the social democratic leaders actually undertook to organize and maintain the capitalist state against the revolutionary onslaught of the workers. A German social democrat, Noske, drowned in blood the workers' revolution in Germany in 1918 and 1919. Social democratic ministers suppressed strikes, fired at workers' demonstrations, declared martial law against the workers. A socialist government in Great Britain sent armies to subdue the uprising of the colonial peoples. The Social Democrats of France took the initiative in introducing the imperialist martial laws. In short, everywhere the leaders of social democracy became part and parcel of the bourgeois state apparatus. They advanced the idea that where there is a coalition government, meaning a government of capitalist and socialist ministers, there we have a transition from capitalism to socialism. The fact of the matter is that a coalition government remains a capitalist government since it does not shake the foundations of capitalism, private property, and exploitation. On the contrary, it only serves to strengthen capitalism by deceiving the workers with the idea of the peaceful transition to socialism. Quick comment here, if you haven't already listened to our audiobook of Dutt's Fascism and Social Revolution, it's long at about 13 hours, but it's well worth it, and it goes into this topic in a lot more detail. Continuing. In Germany and Austria, social democracy actually aided the growth of fascism. Fascist bands were being organized under the protection of social democratic governments. Fascist demonstrations were unmolested by social democratic police presidents, while communist demonstrations were being dispersed. Fascist bands were allowed to arm, while the militant Red Front organization of the German workers was outlawed. Martial law and semi-martial law were repeatedly introduced to curb the movement of the workers who demanded an improvement of their intolerable conditions. In the very same way as Lenin, after the betrayal of the proletariat by social democracy at the beginning of the war, called the social democratic leaders social patriots and social chauvinists, so the Communist International, after the new betrayals of social democracy, called its leaders social fascists, in the sense of paving the way for fascism. It was disastrous for the proletariat of Germany and of the whole world that the social democratic leaders made common cause with capitalism. It was disastrous that so many millions of workers were deceived by the socialist phrases of the social democratic leaders and believed them to be true fighters for the interests of the working class. It was unfortunate that the Communist Party of Germany could swing only around 6 million votes and did not have the majority of the working class behind it. It would have been better for the workers of Germany and for the world revolution had the masses of German workers cherished fewer illusions about their social democratic leaders. It would have been difficult for fascism to sweep into power in Germany had there been organized in Germany a powerful united front. It cannot be denied that there were certain weaknesses in the work of the Communist Party of Germany, but opposition to the United Front was not among them. The Communist Party did not succeed in bringing all its members into the reformist trade unions so as to have there a stronger revolutionary support. It did not work sufficiently in the reformist trade unions, and this was the most neglected sector of its activities, although it did build the Red trade union opposition with a membership, prior to the advent of fascism, of over 300,000. It did not root itself sufficiently in the factories and plants. It was not flexible enough in approaching social democratic rank-and-file workers. All these shortcomings were repeatedly pointed out by the Communist International, and the party made strong efforts to improve its work. As a result, its influence grew tremendously. Quoting Pianitsky's The Present Situation in Germany, during the last period before Hitler came to power, the Communist Party succeeded in penetrating the broad masses and even in obtaining influence among the Social Democrats, the members of the reformist trade unions, and also the members of the Republican Flag, Reichsbanner organization, for the very reason that it was able to organize the struggle against this emergency decree. The authority of the party was greatly enhanced, and members of reformist trade unions began to participate in the strikes led by the Red trade union opposition and the communists. Thus, besides the communists, members of reformist trade unions and even National Socialists participated in the Berlin Transport Strike Committee." Unquote. The Communist Party of Germany was ready to fight fascism. As a matter of fact, the communists did fight the fascist bands in the streets on numerous occasions, meeting their attacks and the attacks of the police, which in Prussia, for instance, was under social democratic command and everywhere protected the brown shirts. That the communists were working for a united front with the social democratic workers, if need be through an agreement with the social democratic leaders, may be seen from the following. In 1925, the Communist Party proposed to the Social Democratic Party a united struggle against the monarchist danger. Later in the year, seeing that the Communists and the Social Democrats had a majority of members in the Berlin municipality, the Communists proposed to the Social Democrats a common program of action for the interests of the workers. In 1926, the Communists called upon the Social Democratic leaders to join in a plebiscite against returning the property to the former German royal family. In the spring of 1928, the Communist Party proposed joint May Day demonstrations. In October 1928, it proposed joint anti-militarist action against the building of a battle cruiser. In 1929-32, it repeatedly proposed joint action against wage cuts. In April 1932, it proposed a joint struggle of all working-class organizations against an impending wage cut. All these proposals were turned down by social democracy. Broad masses of workers responded to some of the communist appeals for united action. Social democratic leaders preferred cooperation with the capitalist parties. When von Papen drove the Social Democrats out of the Prussian government, the Communist Party proposed a joint general strike for the repeal of the emergency decrees and for the disbanding of the stormtroops. On January 30, 1933, when Hitler came into power, the Communist Party again proposed a general strike to fight reaction. Again in March 1933, after the burning of the Reichstag, the Communist Party called upon the Social Democratic Party and the trade unions to declare a general strike against the attack on the workers. All these proposals were rejected by the Social Democrats, who preferred to believe that they could function and maintain a modicum of power against any capitalist regime. Who is to be blamed? Trotsky says the communists are to blame. Why? Because they called the Social Democrats social fascists. Trotsky cannot deny the fact that the communists were trying to organize the United Front. They organized the anti-fascist action, which was to unite workers of various parties. They tried to organize the United Front in the factories and unions. The Social Democratic leaders sowed mistrust toward the communists and toward the United Front, and this hampered the communist action. Trotsky did his bit. Now he is dissatisfied. Here is his chief trump, quoting from The Militant, March 10, 1934. Had the Comintern placed, from 1929, or even from 1930 or 31, at the foundation of its policies the objective irreconcilability between social democracy and fascism, or more exactly between fascism and social democracy. Okay. If upon this it had built a systematic and persistent policy of the United Front, Germany within a few months would have been covered with a network of mighty committees of proletarian defense, potential workers' Soviets, that is, unquote. But my dear Mr. Trotsky, there was no irreconcilability between social democracy and fascism, or more exactly, between the social democratic leaders and fascism. There was no irreconcilability as far as the social democratic leaders were concerned. They certainly had not anticipated that they would be so ruthlessly driven out. They had formed a substantial part of the state apparatus under all regimes prior to that of Hitler, and they were convinced that even under Hitler they would retain a certain share of power. No matter how much the communists would have painted before them the dire results they were to expect from the ascendancy of fascism, they simply would not have believed it. They would have said they knew better. Witness the conduct of the Austrian Social Democratic leaders, who were supposed to be much more radical than their German brethren, and who had the experience of their German comrades. Listen to the testimony of the, quote, left Marxist Otto Bauer in his interview with the New York Times correspondent G.E.R. Getty, published February 18, 1934, as to how the Social Democrats of Austria were ready to cooperate with the fascist dictator Dollfuss at the expense of the Austrian constitution. Quote, since the date of the Hitler triumph in Germany, March 5, when the Reichstag elections gave the German Nazis control, our party has made the very greatest efforts to come to an agreement with the government. In the first weeks of March, our leaders were still in close personal contact with Dollfuss, and frequently tried to get him to agree to a constitutional solution. At the end of March, he promised our leader, Dr. Dennenberg, personally that at the beginning of April, he would open negotiations with us for the reform of the Constitution. Olgin adds, for the limiting of bourgeois democracy to suit fascism. This promise he never fulfilled, for at the beginning of April, he passed over definitely to the fascist camp, and refused to speak to any of the socialists. When he said that he could not see the existing leaders, we offered to send him other negotiators. He refused sharply. As we could not see him again, we tried to negotiate through other people. Honestly, we left no stone unturned. We approached President Miklas. Then we tried the clerical politicians, whom we had known for a long time. But everything was shattered on the stubborn resistance of Dollfuss, who simply refused to hear of the socialists again. A group of religious socialists got together with a group of Catholic Democrats and tried to induce the church to intervene. This also failed." Unquote. Suppose you offered them at that time a united front with the communists to fight Dollfuss. They did not think of fighting fascism. They had no intention of defending bourgeois democracy. Listen to this precious admission by Bauer in the same interview, quote, "We offered to make the greatest concessions that a democratic and socialistic party ever made. We let Dollfuss know that if he would only pass a bill through Parliament, we would accept a measure authorizing the government to govern by decree without Parliament for 2 years. Wow. On 2 conditions: that a small parliamentary committee in which the government had a majority should be able to criticize decrees, and that a constitutional court, the only protection against breaches of the Constitution, should be restored." Unquote. They certainly were prepared to go far enough. The, quote, left Social Democrats were ready to agree to the abolition of Parliament provided the abolition is passed by Parliament, a procedure actually practiced in Germany under Hitler. They were ready, they say, to agree to a government without Parliament for 2 years, but it is quite obvious that it would not have been over difficult to induce them to accept an extension of the time. They were interested in maintaining their positions in the trade unions, in the municipalities, in the police power, in the judicial system, knowing very well that those positions would be curtailed under fascism. They clung to a shadow of power at the time when, according to their own testimony, quote, "the dissatisfaction and agitation of the workers against the conservative policy of our party committee grew as the government provocations increased. Excitement rose to a fever pitch during the last weeks." Unquote. It is for not having induced such leaders to organize a united front that Trotsky blames the communists. Be it remembered that he does not blame the communists for not approaching the workers because he knows very well that they did approach the workers and did make every effort to induce them to join the United Front. His chief stock in trade is the accusation that the communist leaders did not make peace with the Social Democratic top leaders. Trotsky's argument in support of the possibility of a united front with the Social Democratic leaders holds no water. Quoting Trotsky in The Militant again, social democracy can neither live nor breathe without leaning upon the political and trade union organizations of the working class. Concurrently, it is precisely along this line that the irreconcilable contradiction between social democracy and fascism takes place. Precisely along this line does there open up the necessity and unbridgeable stage of the policies of the United Front with the social democracy." Unquote. This argument is just as incorrect as the English translation of the sentences is rotten. Events have proven that the bourgeoisie resorts to fascism when it finds that social democracy is no longer able to keep in check the revolutionary movement of the masses. For this reason, all the mass organizations of the working class, even if dominated by social democratic leaders, are suppressed. But prior to the advent of Hitler, the social democratic leaders did not believe this. They relied on capitalist democracy, on the Weimar Constitution, on the German respect for law and order, and, last but not least, on their record in the service of the bourgeoisie. They invented the policy of supporting the lesser evil just to have an excuse for collaborating with the bourgeoisie. Their Berlin chief of police, Zorgiebel, opened machine gun fire on workers participating in a May Day parade in 1929 without a permit. The number of victims was more than 30. Their leaders approved of semi-martial law introduced to quell the workers' revolts. Their leaders supported wage cuts and armaments. Social democracy supported the governments of Brüning, von Papen, and Schleicher. It was ready to support Hitler. Did it not give its recognition to the Hitler government after the elections of March 5, 1933, declaring that Hitler had been legally appointed by Hindenburg and given a clear mandate by a majority of the people? Was it not ready to cooperate with the Hitler government if offered a chance? Was it not assuming the role of a loyal opposition even after being kicked in the face by the Nazi boots? Did not the Social Democratic Parliamentary Group on May 17, 1933, vote unanimously in the Reichstag in favor of Hitler's policy? Did not Karl Severing remain a reporter of Hitler in spite of it all? Did not the same veteran Social Democratic leader appeal to the population of the Tsar to vote for the Nazis? Did not the Social Democratic Union leaders make overtures to Hitler? When their collapse came, when they were ignominiously driven out without resistance, then the process of revaluation of values began, not only among the Social Democratic workers, but also among some of the leaders. One section, Severing and Co., are just waiting for an opportunity to be taken in by the fascists. The center is vacillating. The left wing is for a united front with the communists. The United Front is making headway, notably in France, in Spain, and also in the United States, under the initiative and leadership of the communists. But to expect that the leaders of German social democracy would have agreed to the United Front with the communists before January 1933 is to be a Trotsky. At the bottom of all this preachment is Trotsky's Menshevik attitude to social democracy. The old Menshevik asserts himself in the leader of the, quote, left opposition. He does not believe that social democracy is as bad as all that. He's sincere when he says that the communists shouldn't have called the social democratic leaders social fascists. He believes they are not. He believes they are also fighters, at least for bourgeois democracy, as against fascism, and for the interests of the workers as far as they can be defended under bourgeois democracy. The Social Democrats to him are also valid socialists. Now, it's perfectly true that if the communists had abandoned their communist position and made peace with the German Social Democratic leaders on the terms of those leaders, then there would have been a united front. The trouble is, it wouldn't have been a united front against fascism. The travesty of the whole barrage is evident from the experiences of France. When the United Front was established in France, when huge mass movements against fascism began to develop on a United Front basis, the Trotsky group joined the Socialist Party, fused with it, and is fighting within the Socialist Party against the United Front. Here you have the Trotskyites in action. But why didn't the Communist Party attempt an armed uprising in Germany in the early part of 1933 with its own forces? This German question is often asked by Trotskyites. The answer is given by Lenin, who explains the fundamental law of revolution. Quote, "It is not sufficient for revolution that the exploited and oppressed masses understand the impossibility of living in the old way and demand changes. For revolution, it is necessary that the exploiters should not be able to live and rule as of old. Only when the lower classes do not want the old regime, and when the upper classes are unable to govern as of old, then only can revolution succeed. This truth may be expressed in other words. Revolution is impossible without an all-national crisis, affecting both the exploited and the exploiters. It follows that for revolution it is essential, first, that a majority of the workers, or at least a majority of the conscious, thinking, politically active workers, should fully understand the necessity for revolution and be ready to sacrifice their lives for it. Secondly, that the ruling class be in a state of governmental crisis, which attracts even the most backward masses into politics, weakens the government, and facilitates its rapid overthrow by the revolutionaries." Unquote. In discussing the German situation of the time when Hitler came to power, O. Piatnitsky, a leader of the Communist International, quotes the above Leninist definition of a revolutionary situation and draws the inevitable conclusion. He says, "Had all these conditions matured in Germany in January 1933? No. The entire bourgeoisie, in the face of the menace of a proletarian revolution, in spite of the existence of discords among them, stood united against the revolutionary proletariat. The overwhelming majority of the petty bourgeoisie followed the bourgeoisie as represented by Hitler, who promised them the return of the grand old Germany in which the petty bourgeoisie had lived in more or less tolerable conditions. The proletariat was split by the Social Democratic Party, which was still followed by the majority of the workers. So the exploiters were still able to live and administer, were still able to exploit the working class as of old, although by new, fascist methods." Unquote. The Presidium of the Executive Committee of the Comintern, evaluating the German situation, came to the only conclusion which a responsible leadership could draw from the existing relationship of the social forces in Germany. Quote, "Under these circumstances, the proletariat was in a position in which it could not organize and in fact failed to organize an immediate and decisive blow against the state apparatus, which, for the purpose of fighting against the proletariat, absorbed the fighting organizations of the fascist bourgeoisie, the storm troops, the steel helmets, and the Reichswehr. The bourgeoisie was able without serious resistance to hand over the power of government in the country to the National Socialists, who act against the working class by means of provocation, bloody terror, and political banditry. In analyzing the conditions for a victorious uprising of the proletariat, Lenin said that a decisive battle can be considered as fully mature, quoting Lenin, "if all the class forces which were hostile to us have become sufficiently entangled, have sufficiently come to blows, have sufficiently weakened themselves by the struggle which is beyond their strength. If all the vacillating, hesitating, unstable, intermediate elements, i.e. the petty bourgeoisie, petty bourgeois democracy as distinguished from the bourgeoisie, have sufficiently exposed themselves to the people, have sufficiently disgraced themselves by their practical bankruptcy, if among the proletariat mass sentiment has begun and is rising strongly in favor of supporting the most decisive, supremely bold, and revolutionary action against the bourgeoisie, then the revolution has matured, and if we have properly taken into account all of the conditions mentioned above and have properly selected the moment, our victory is assured." That ends the Lenin quote. Back to the Comintern. "The characteristic feature of the circumstances at the time of the Hitler coup was that these conditions for a victorious rising had not yet managed to mature at that moment. They only existed in an embryonic state. As for the vanguard of the proletariat, the Communist Party, not wishing to slip into adventurism, it of course could not compensate for this missing factor by its own actions." Unquote. Trotsky's criticism of the Comintern is the expression of the despair of a petty bourgeois, frightened by fascism and disbelieving in the revolutionary forces of the proletariat. Trotsky's proposed policies, therefore, are policies of a frightened petty bourgeois reformist. Quoting a Trotsky article, Our Present Tasks, December 9, 1933, "Democratic slogans and illusions cannot be abolished by decree. It is necessary that the masses go through them and outlive them in the experience of battle. It is necessary to find the dynamic elements in the present defensive position of the working class. We must make the masses draw conclusions from their democratic logic. We must widen and deepen the channels of the struggle." Unquote. In these words is contained a whole program. It presupposes a general political situation where black reaction is destined to reign supreme for a very long period, and where there can be no thought of a determined proletarian fight for power. It presupposes a stable capitalist system. It assumes that the struggle of the workers for the improvement of their immediate conditions must necessarily proceed in parliamentary channels. It therefore advances the struggle for democratic reforms as the prime task of the workers. Like all such social democratic creations, it is both reactionary and utopian. It is reactionary because it gives up the proletarian struggle for power at a time when conditions are rapidly maturing for such a struggle. It is utopian because it is not possible for the workers at any time to confine themselves to democratic slogans alone if they are to defend their right to live. The workers are hungry, they're oppressed, They must fight for higher wages, social insurance, against police brutality, against lynching laws. Whenever they undertake a real fight, they inevitably reach out beyond the limits of bourgeois democracy. They clash with the police. They defy the courts. They break injunctions. They forcibly annul evictions. They, quote, riot. When capitalism is shaken and undermined as at present, the seizure of power becomes a task for the near future. Every fight is a step nearer to the seizure of power. Every battle gives the working class new experience, teaches it the lessons of unity and concerted advance against the bourgeoisie. Only such an advance can yield immediate improvement of the workers' lives today, can secure for them elementary rights and better economic conditions. It is the class struggle against capitalism that the communists are inscribing on the banner of the working class. The class struggle which, in its sharpest form, is armed uprising, the final battles for the dictatorship of the proletariat. It is class collaboration on which Trotsky is building the flimsy structure of his Fourth International program. Listen to a Trotskyite, quote, Bolshevik, exhorting the world in the following piece of sonorous declamation. Quoting from Our Present Tasks again, we Bolsheviks consider that the real salvation from fascism and war lies in the revolutionary conquest of power and the establishment of the proletarian dictatorship. Olgin adds, but our, quote, belief is just a shadow, bloodless, lifeless. You, socialist workers, Olgin adds, read social democratic bureaucrats, do not agree to this road. You hope not only to save what has been gained, but also to move forward along the road of democracy. Olgin adds, in collaboration with Roosevelt, Richburg, and Perkins. Good. As long as we have not convinced you and attracted you to our side, we are ready to follow this road with you to the end. Olgin adds, it is easier to follow you than to bother with rank-and-file workers who may not agree to submit to, quote, democratic edicts of chiefs of police. But we demand that you carry on the struggle for democracy not in words, but in deeds. Olgin adds, for instance, let Norman Thomas pay a new visit to the First Lady of the land. Make your party open up a real struggle for a strong democratic movement. Olgin adds, which is to be even more misleading than the Epic or La Follette movements, which contain economic planks in their programs. For this, it is necessary first of all to sweep away all the remnants of the feudal state. It is necessary to give the suffrage to all men and women who reached their 18th birthday, also to the soldiers in the army. Olgin adds, forget about the hunger of the boys and girls. Give them the happiness of suffrage that will be a balm to their wound. Incidentally, it costs the bosses less than social insurance. Full concentration of legislative and executive power in the hands of one chamber. Let your party open up a serious campaign under these slogans. Let it arouse millions of workers. Let it conquer power through the drive of the masses. Olgin adds, hurrah for a new Ebert, Noska, Scheidemann, Ramsay MacDonald government. This at any rate would be a serious attempt of struggle against fascism and war. Olgin adds, in the same way as Severing, Otto Bauer, and Julius Deutsch fought against fascism and war. We Bolsheviks would retain the right to explain to the workers the insufficiency of democratic slogans. We could not take upon ourselves the political responsibility for the social democratic government, but we would honestly help you in the struggle for such a government. Olgin, we would help you to deceive the masses. Together with you, we would repel all attacks of bourgeois reaction. Olgin adds, and help shoot down workers and farmers who infringe on, quote, democratic laws in their fight for bread. More than that, we would bind ourselves before you not to undertake any revolutionary actions which go beyond the limits of democracy, real democracy, so long as the majority of the workers has not consciously placed itself on the side of revolutionary dictatorship. Olgin adds, it will be our democratic duty to break, quote, unlawful strikes and to disperse, quote, unlawful assembly. How dare they go beyond the limits of real bourgeois democracy? That's the end of the quote. I have to add there, that is putrid, and really an excellent illustration of the points already raised. Continuing, it must be made clear at the outset that when Trotsky addresses himself to the, quote, socialist workers, he means the socialist leaders, those who prevent the socialist workers from engaging in the real class struggle. It must be noted, secondly, that the program which he proposes is purely reformist. He would help social democracy to become the government in a capitalist state, quote, honestly help it. He would help social democracy improve the machinery of the capitalist state. He would bind himself to undertake no actions that go beyond bourgeois democracy. When he says, quote, real democracy, he ought to know that such democracy exists only as the dictatorship of the proletariat, and that every bourgeois democracy, no matter how embellished, is a sham democracy, designed as a weapon of the exploiters against the exploited. In other words, he undertakes to help fasten upon the workers the rule of the capitalists operating through the instrumentality of bourgeois fake democracy. Comment: when we talk about Trotskyism as the advanced detachment of the bourgeoisie, that's what we're talking about. Continuing, it must be noted, third, that not in vain did Trotsky omit such vital demands as higher wages, a shorter labor day, unemployment insurance, the right of the oppressed nationalities. For the moment that the workers undertake the fight for such demands, bourgeois legality goes smash. The limits of bourgeois democracy are overstepped. Trotsky implicitly promises the social democratic leaders not to undertake such actions, not to countenance them. Moreover, he knows well that when the Social Democrats are in power, they will use the state's armed forces against the workers if they undertake such actions. And commenting, when I called it putrid before, I mean, you're in a situation where the bourgeoisie are already doing fascism. They've already resorted to fascism to repress the possibility of a revolution. What is the pathway back from that? And does it look like this reformist program that Trotsky is laying out? Continuing, when he appeals to the Social Democrats to join with him, he is forced to confine himself to such innocuous demands as one chamber and the lowering of the voting age. It is only here that the Social Democrats can meet him halfway, and it is on such a program that he is willing to bind up the fate of the Trotskyites with the fate of the Social Democratic leaders. Once more, we have before us the petty bourgeois who is panic-stricken. He has seen the advent of fascism. He believes that fascism has come to stay. He believes that the working class is crushed. He calumniates the Communist Party of Germany, saying that it is dead when in reality it lives and fights. He does not wish to see the forces making for a social revolution. He does not wish to understand that once the masses rise, and wherever they rise, they must fight for their lives against hunger, against annihilation at the hands of finance capital, and that means fighting against the capitalist state, whether in its fascist or in its democratic form. He does not wish to realize that the workers, the masses of the workers, the majority of the workers, will join the banner of struggle against the capitalists, which is always a struggle undermining the capitalist state. He wants to keep the masses of workers from engaging in the struggle against capitalism under communist leadership. He appeals to the Social Democratic leaders for a united front on this program. No wonder he's against the united front, as built by the communist parties. Such a united front is directed against capitalism. It does not build fortresses for capitalism. It comes to destroy them.